Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3, final day of PMI. I'm going to hand it over to Elissa, who's going to go ahead and get us started.
Today for day 3 of PMI 2022. I'd like to start off by sharing the vision and mission of the Western Justice Center. Our Western Justice Center envisions a world in which communities are healed, united, and transformed through conflict resolution education and restorative practices rooted in equity, justice, and opportunity. The Western Justice Center empowers people like you to strengthen your community by growing your conflict resolution skills and capacity focused on youth, educators, schools, and community partners. And we're very excited to be here today for the story of Azusa. I want to introduce my fellow panelist. I'm Elissa, again, Executive Director of Western Justice Center, and a very wonderful human being, Arturo Magaña, who is our conflict resolution education program coordinator here at WJC. Arturo has a master's in public administration from Cal State Long Beach and a master's in guidance counseling from Loyola Marymount University. He's worked in public education for 15 years with foster youth and after-school programs and community schools initiatives. In fact, he was the co-chair for the Institute for Educational Leadership's Coordinators Network. We worked along other community school coordinators across the United States and Canada on a range of educational equity initiatives. And in his free time, he enjoys being a variety Twitch streamer, playing different games, including Pokemon. So Arturo, take it away.
All right. Thank you for that. So real quick about WJC is that we were founded back in 1987 by judges, lawyers, and civic leaders, and a great leader of ours, the Honorable Dorothy W. Nelson. WJC works in a multi-year basis with school district partners. We like to stay engaged, and we like to be an extra arm that schools and districts can fall upon for support and for continued support throughout the years. And we also provide many different opportunities for empowerment, both adults and youth in Greater LA. So last year, our theme was around getting into good trouble. And this year we switched gears a little bit and we decided to kind of go with the theme of building a village. And this was actually coming from the feedback of our students. So over the summer last year, we organized a group of high school students that you saw in the beginning of the panel on Tuesday. They actually helped design what PMI looks like today. So quick round of applause for them in the chat, if you may. And they all provided us feedback that they really wanted to emphasize on community building because of the fact that we have endured a lot in these past 2 years. Many losses and much isolation that has happened in many different communities. But among that, we've seen a lot of division. You know, being isolated at home has also created a lot of divisional states. But within that also, we've also seen an immense amount of community. We've seen people get together. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen it as we are using it now. We've seen it through Zoom and many different virtual platforms. And then, you know, now we're starting to see people come back together and embrace each other safely. So while last year's theme was getting into good trouble, today, specifically this week, we're building a village of good troublemakers in an effort to heal and come together.
Awesome.
So we got to, you all got to get introduced to your moderators, Elissa and I. And what we're going to do now is go ahead and introduce our guest panelists. So I have the honor and privilege of being able to introduce Gary Creel. Gary Creel is the assistant superintendent. No, I'm sorry. I'm getting your title wrong. You are the director of child and welfare in Azusa Unified School District. Gary Creel has a master's in educational counseling. He has worked in public education for 23 years. Both as a teacher, counselor, and currently as a director of child welfare and attendance. And some of his duties include coordinating and supervising the K-12 Student Support Services Program and guidance, counseling, attendance, discipline, and health and welfare services. Thank you for joining us, Gary. And next up we have, if I can find her, Yvette Valdez. Yvette Valdez graduated from Cal Poly Pomona. I haven't added her on the stream just yet, but she's going to come on stage soon. Graduated from Cal Poly Pomona with her studies focusing on sociology and social work, and is currently planning to get her master's in social work. Has worked in AUSD, Azusa Unified, for 8 years, currently serving as a secretary in the Child and Welfare and Attendance Department. So give it up for Yvette. Next up is Oscar Oyama. Oscar is currently the assistant principal at Gladstone High School. I'm so sorry. And he works in the guidance office. And in addition to that, he is also overseeing the activities at Gladstone High School. He was also the assistant principal at Foothill Middle School in a couple years ago as well. And he is a bilingual educator he has been a bilingual educator in K-8 in San Mateo Foster City School District for 13 years. Thank you for joining us, Oscar. And next we have Claudia Coulter-Brown. Claudia has served as a teacher in public education for nearly 2 decades, has been trained by the Strauss Institute in mediation. In addition to holding her master's degree from Pepperdine Law in Dispute Resolution, she also holds a master's in political science from Claremont Graduate University, a bachelor's in history from California State University, San Marcos, and both a California teaching and administrative services credentials. Has held positions both inside and outside of the classroom as a teacher, a restorative practices trainer, and an anti-bullying coordinator. So round of applause for our panelists. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Elissa back on stage. And I believe Yvette is having a little bit of camera issue. Oh, there she goes. She's jumping in.
Yay.
And
Hi, Yvette.
To Elissa.
Hi, everyone. I am very, very excited to be with you all today. We're extremely honored that we've had an opportunity to work with Azusa over the last couple of years. And I want to kick off our panel discussion with a question for Ms. Coulter-Brown. Claudia, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with the Western Justice Center and about why you felt it was important to connect our work with what you were doing in the district?
Great. I definitely can. So when I was a student at Pepperdine Law, one of the things that we needed to do was an externship. I live in Pasadena. Western Justice is in Pasadena. So at the time, I believe it was under the direction of Judge Judy Churlin. Is that her name? Her name?
Yeah, that's the one.
Right. So I worked there. I hardly interacted with her, but I worked under Emily Linnemeyer. Went through ABCs of Conflict a couple times. It was great. I worked, I don't know how many hours I put in there, a couple semesters. So then fast forward, I'm working for Gary Creel. I said, look, I'm going to this Kids Managing Conflict Symposium. And they introduced you as the new director of Western Justice Center. I was like, what? What is happening? I need to go meet this lady. And so I was like, and I met Sean. Sean was there that day too. And we met, and I was like, as somebody who has a degree in mediation, who practices mediation, I really believe in it, and I know kids can do it. So I was like, Elissa, we need to meet. We had breakfast, right? And I was like, we need to figure out what we can do to bring this to Azusa because the kids need it, and I need somebody besides me who believes in it so that they'll buy in.
Yep.
And that's how it started. And you guys just took it from there.
Great. That is really fantastic and is a great way to get us started. So this is for Mr. Creel, Gary, and Mr. Oyama, Oscar, and Mrs. Valdez, Yvette. One of the things that was really exciting when we first started working with Azusa is that we met Gary, and then he began by building the team right away. So the three of you came to ABCs of Conflict in 2019. That's our training program where we teach people how to start a peer mediation program, how to use restorative practices, how to use both of those things to address racism and other forms of bias in the classroom and to deal with bullying and other issues. And a lot of people go to trainings and then they're done. But you all had a very different result. What was different about your experience with the Western Justice Center that inspired you to bring conflict resolution education to life in your district? And how did the work that we were talking about fit in with the work that you were already doing in Azusa?
I'll start. To kind of go back to what Claudia was saying earlier, when she was working for me, she was pretty much doing her own thing, but she was a PBIS, was it a TOSA or was it a program specialist?
It was a TOSA.
TOSA, okay, which is a teacher on special assignment, and PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. And it's something that a lot of schools use rather than what used to be, punitive responses. And actually PBIS is for the grown-ups. It's not really for kids. It's to teach the adults, how they should be, managing students, managing their classrooms and teaching. And so Claudia was doing a lot of that work. And as she said, she met with you, Elissa, and then she came and told me about the Western Justice Center. I was aware of restorative practices, and we'd done, some sorts of trainings and whatnot with LACO, but just being trained in restorative practices isn't enough. I mean, that's one person or two people, that there's really very little you can do with that, except in your small environment, like a classroom or, possibly at a school like Oscar did at Foothill Middle School, but it's very small. And so Claudia came and she was telling me about these, wonderful things, and it was, free, and, we could just, go and take part in this. And so I thought, great. The big part of all this, I think, is that, our district, like other districts, we're looking to reduce suspensions because suspensions don't work. And that's why you start looking at, PBIS or Safe and Civil Schools or all of these other programs that are out there to try to reduce suspensions while also allowing teachers to do their jobs. And so there are a lot of trainings, as you said, Elissa, and we go to many trainings and we get a little bit from all of them. But at Claudia's behest, she was saying this is something different, and it's a week long. It's life changing. You will come out of this a better person, and I did. And we can talk about that in a bit. With Oscar, he was a new assistant principal, and he was pretty much voluntold to take part in the training. And with Yvette as my assistant, I like her to at least know what I know. Usually she knows much more and is the go-to person, but I really want to have someone that I work with that is very, very knowledgeable in whatever it may be, in this case, WJC, but also Yvette is very much an advocate, for underrepresented people, and she grew up in Azusa, and this is something that is very near and dear to her heart. This is her community and she wants it to work, and I knew that too. And so she, I think, was a perfect choice to be involved in this as well. And Oscar, I'll kick it over to you if you don't mind. I don't want to talk all the time.
All right, thank you, Gary. And I'm going to piggyback on all of what you just said right now. One of the major things that we were looking for at Azusa Unified is to reduce suspensions. Yes, PBIS had already been in place in Azusa when I arrived, but there was an addition. Something was missing, and that little piece was, how do we get the students involved? Because PBIS is basically for the adult side. Hey, teachers, this is how we want to interact with the students. Let's catch them doing the right thing, and you know what, and that really does work for the most part, but it doesn't solve the main issue, And the big issue in middle schools and in high schools was student conflict. Sometimes their personalities clashed, and there were some issues that were not going to get resolved by PBIS. So we needed to add something. I was lucky enough in my previous district to get trained in restorative practices, but then there was a missing component as to how do you add that into the classroom, or how do you add that into the school community so that it's an additional tool in your toolbox. But then when Gary kind of just like everybody knows now, he kind of already told me to come in and take this training for the week. It definitely added that component like, hey, this is how we do restorative practices, and this is how we get our students involved in it. Because we really need to start realizing that students need to be part of solving some of the problems that are happening inside the classrooms and inside of our school communities. And without their help, we're really going to be swimming upstream the entire time.
Thank you for that, Oscar. And what better way to kick off the next question than actually go into your experience. You talk a little bit about your experience up in San Mateo, but specifically at Foothill, right? You now went through the ABCs of conflict. You got corralled by Gary, and now you went and you're pumped up, you're gung ho. You established your first peer mediation program at Foothill Middle School, and tell us a little bit about how the peer mediation program empowered the students to make this restorative practice and restorative justice program their own. What did that look like for you?
Well, I was really excited to actually bring, the Western Justice Center program onto not Gladstone. Well, eventually I did bring it to Gladstone, but at Foothill Middle School, because I had the opportunity to get students involved. There were a couple of students that were really, really popular, and they had a lot of charisma, and students looked up to them as leaders. And when I brought those students into, and I asked them, like, hey, how would you like to help me solve some of these minor issues between the students that we're seeing right here on campus? And they were mostly 8th graders, so they knew exactly what the 6th and 7th graders were going through during that time of the year. And they reflect and they go, and they pretty much said, yes, absolutely. What do we need to do so that we can start solving some of these issues, and how can we help better our school climate? And the school tools that you guys provided to us during that week-long training, I really used those online lessons to give the students mini lessons. Once a week in the morning, I would pull out the 8 to 10 students that I had as peer mediators. And in those 20 minutes, it was just a quick lesson. Hey, what would you do? What's happening here? What would you do? What kind of life experiences can you share with the students so that they don't make the same mistakes that they are making right now? And it lit a fire under them. The great thing about it is that we saw basically within a month, our school culture really changed, where even teachers started noticing, and they started kind of saying like, hey, it feels like our students are calmer. It feels like there's less bickering in school at Foothill. And it was true. And one of the things that we found out later on was that our peer mediators were going around during lunchtime, and they were just kind of wandering around and taking it upon themselves, even though we told them not to kind of look for issues that they would see, and they knew which students were going to have issues during the day. And they would kind of just squash it. There were certain times where they said, like, we can't handle this, Mr. Oyama, so we might need your help. And then they tipped me off as to what was happening and what was the core issue that needed to be resolved. And you know what? It just took a life of its own. It was actually great to see the students, our 8th graders, just take it upon themselves to make sure that our school was safe, and that students got along, and and it was about the learning, not bringing the issues into the classrooms or on campus.
You had mentioned, and I love this. You had mentioned that, piggybacking off of what you said, that at some point when the peer mediation program was running at Foothill, that at some point there was this like pivot where teachers and staff were saying, "Oh wow, I can eat my lunch today," And that kind of became this static thing. Like every day was like, I can eat my lunch today, and I can eat my lunch today. And it was, I think, a testament of the work that you and your students have put together. Kudos to you. So, piggybacking off of that is that you now transitioned into Gladstone High School, right? And you transitioned actually in the middle of a pandemic. You started the school year 2020 to 2021 in Gladstone High School, and same energy, same drive, and you established a peer mediation program at Gladstone High School. What motivated you? I'm so sorry. When you were building the program at Gladstone High School, what were the key differences, and what was kind of easier and harder to do than in reference to like the middle school experience?
Well, I'll start with the difficult part. The difficult part was actually recruiting the students because the schools were closed. I did not have the opportunity to actually get to know the students in person, face to face. And plus, I was also a brand new administrator, so I really didn't know anybody on campus. So I had to rely on recommendations from teachers, from administrators in the middle schools to see which students had the potential to become peer mediators at the high school level. So luckily, I was able to get those names, and it worked out. I was able to reach out to those students by making phone calls and also using Google Classroom or Google Meets just to see what their interest level was. And the other difficult part was actually the training. And this is where you, Arturo, and Sean were extremely helpful, because you guys were basically doing an hour-long training session once a week right after our students got off of their Google Classroom. And it was really, really valuable. That's actually the type of training that benefited those students the most. Like I'm still in contact with a lot of those peer mediators, even one, Mario, that graduated last year. And he goes, actually just talking and seeing the faces, even though it was on camera and on the computer, actually having that opportunity to interact with each other at their grade level, it really did benefit them, so that they were able to think about what are some of the issues that were going to be coming up for this year, possibly. So that was an amazing experience right there. The easy part for me coming over from Foothill to Gladstone was I knew what the program can do. I knew what the program should look like. So those, just building upon my experiences from Foothill, that really did help me to bring the peer mediation program over. And it hasn't taken a hold completely 100%, but I can say that it's about 75% there. We just need to continue recruiting additional students, especially my seniors that are graduating this year. We definitely need to get other underclassmen involved in this program. But in due time, everything will come to fruition.
Wow, that was great. Arturo, you okay with me jumping in with another question?
Oh yeah, of course.
Great. I love hearing from Oscar, Mr. Oyama, who is definitely our boots on the ground. And Claudia is also that person. And I think what's been so powerful about what's happened in Azusa is that we have both our first responders, right? Our classroom educators and our administrators, but also folks at the district level that are really actively bought in to what we're doing. And Gary, you've been extremely instrumental, and having someone at the district level who really understands both the potential and the practical application of this work has been a game changer, I think, for how fast this process has moved in Azusa, even while we're moving through the crisis of the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit about what motivated you personally to champion peer mediation and restorative justice for your district? And what efforts did you make to ensure that the work would expand beyond Foothill and Gladstone?
Sure. Well, first, I mean, going back to when I started this position 17 years ago, child welfare and attendance is very much, or it was very much at that point, a punitive position. That my position was the position that expelled students, and all the disciplinary issues, that kind of things. And when I first started, our district would have literally, 2,000 or 3,000 suspensions, and 40 plus expulsions. A lot.
Wow.
And as Arturo mentioned, I come from a counseling background, and I was appointed to this position by the superintendent because she wanted not to have a punitive response to students, behaviors, because, adolescents sometimes don't do the smartest things that they could be doing. And that doesn't mean that you get rid of them. Those of us who are parents, don't kick our kids out because they misbehave or something like that. Even if it's bad, you don't kick them out. And that's just what schools were doing. And a lot of research has been done on this, suspension and the relation to, going to prison and all sorts of things like that. And so as I started this position, I was trying to kind of ease up on some of the punitive things that were happening. Part of that's personal, because as a younger person, I made a lot of really poor life choices, and probably would have been sitting in my office with me, and so I understood a little bit that there are bad behaviors, but that doesn't mean the kid is a bad kid. They made a bad choice. And so that took some time. And, it wasn't just me. I mean, society was moving that way too, of course, that, what we were doing and punishing students didn't work. I mentioned earlier that this district, we had tried safe and civil schools and PBIS, both of which are wonderful, but they're canned programs that you just get this program and you have to use it. So to get to your question finally, Elissa, what I saw, with Western Justice Center and, what I experienced at the ABCs of conflict, and it was truly life-changing. And Oscar and I, went together and we had many conversations about this, that, it was very reflective, that, no one really told you what to do or whatever. And people took, different experiences from that training. But what I noted was I was the only administrator there, their district level person there. There was all sorts of teachers. There was a handful of, assistant principals like Oscar, or you may have been just one or two, but it was mostly teachers. And as I said, teachers are great, but they're not going to change the system. They can't. They don't have, I don't want to use the word status, but just in the hierarchy, they're not in the place where they're working with the people who are writing grants and the different departments, whether it be HR or business services or educational services. They can't. They're doing great work in their classroom, but for it to expand, as you said, there has to be someone, at least someone at the district level, who will try to push it through. And that's where my relationship with you, Elissa, I remember when Oscar and I were up in your office and we were talking about what we might be able to do in Azusa. There were several issues going on just socially, among different groups in Azusa and whatnot. And, some kids are getting hurt, and we were trying to figure out what can we do to try to stop this before it gets to that point. And then that just sort of evolved through all of these conversations and, finding grants until we got to the point, and I'm, making this very short, but that we signed a 5-year MOU. Azusa Unified and the Western Justice Center signed a 5-year MOU, which is huge. That's long, for Western Justice Center to help us do the work that we want to do with students. And I think you need that level of commitment from both agencies, both the Western Justice Center and Azusa Unified School District. And then you've got people who are committed, and you also have a document that says we're doing this, for 5 years. And that's a document that you can show to other, agencies who are offering money for the kind of work that we're doing here. And that's a good thing as well. So that I think is kind of where it came from. As I said, just getting into this, I really enjoy working with at-risk youth. It's pretty much teenagers as far as I'm concerned, but it's something I enjoy. And the work is important work. And, I think like all the students that Oscar's worked with and Claudia's worked with and Yvette's worked with, they remember the adults that allowed them to rise.
Yeah.
That, if you have that high standard for students or young people, they will rise to it. You just need to allow them to find their way to do that. And, Oscar was extraordinary, the work that he did with kids, and some really tough kids who literally changed their lives because of the work that they did with Oscar. And they were able to see in themselves and then take that and, help others. And, frankly, 6th graders respect 8th graders more than they do anybody on this panel. And, those 8th graders are able to get the 6th graders to do, whatever they want them to do, basically. And, I think that's part of it, that it just having the students do that work has been extraordinary.
Yeah, before I kick it back over to Arturo, because he's got a question for us before we go into breakout sessions, I think this partnership has been really fantastic. As you said, we've had a long-term commitment. And also, I think it's worth saying that when we started off, we had 3 people trained and maybe 10 students, and programming going at 1 middle school. And just a couple of years later, we've trained all 400 certified and classified staff in the district. We have, I think, nearly 20 people who've now gone through ABCs of conflict, including everyone from classroom teachers and mental health counselors up through principals and even school board members. And now we're going to be, we're at 5 schools this year. So given everything that we've done so far, we've just been through so much, and that kind of leads up to Arturo's wrap-up question for this part of the event.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm gonna kick it off to Yvette first. I know that we had a question for her earlier, and I think we unfortunately didn't get to her, but we're gonna jump into that in the breakout sessions very shortly. But Yvette, and for the rest of the panelists, if we have time, one of the things that we've done is really build community. I think one of the things that I can definitely attest to is at the beginning of 2020, I came in not really knowing anybody in Azusa Unified. And now here at 2022, we're having a lot of conversations about where to eat and hearing about who's going to what school and kids and stuff like that. And what's the, add the work stuff to it, right? The good work that we've been doing, the troublemaking work that we're doing. Yvette, yeah, reflecting back, what is the one thing that you really enjoyed about the partnership and the work that we've been developing in the past 2 years?
Honestly, it's been everything that I've learned. I've met so many great people, even at the ABCs of conflict. I met so many people that I was shocked. To me, I really thought I was going into a training just to hear, the material, the textbook material, and hear some people speak, and then, everybody moves on with their lives. But that training really opened my eyes to a group of people and a whole organization, the WJC, of people who shared and validated my thoughts and feelings that I had growing up about some of our social systems and some, inequalities and inequities that these systems sometimes perpetuate. And still to this day, we're seeing them happening. And so the best part, I think, was getting to meet all these people sharing in these thoughts and feelings, and learning from all of you guys and everybody that I've met.
Thank you. And I got to give a shout out to Yvette, because in these past 2 years, we've been brainstorming, how do we collect this data? How do we do this in the back end? And Yvette just so calmly is like, oh, we can do this. And just like nothing. And you know, just huge shout out to her for being who she is. So